One of the first things you're going to need to do if you want to get into property development is find your first plot of land. And we buy 80% of our land through Rightmove. Yes, Rightmove. Now, many of you don't even know that you can actually buy land through Rightmove. You just assume it's property or getting something to rent. But actually, this is where we find many gems, and we'll explain why Rightmove is one of our preferred choices in finding our next building plot. So you can go into Rightmove and you can search for land. And one of the things you want to do is just search the criteria. So we always advise that you don't go too far away from where you live. So 10 miles, maybe 15, maybe 20 at the most. Okay, depending on where you live and how built up that area is. Don't go too far away from where you live and when you're searching for land. Okay, so you can set your search parameters. You can search for, you can maybe set the price. Maybe 2, 3, 4, 500,000 is as far as you want to go. And you're going to be looking for sites from 1 to 5 units to get started, okay? Don't go any bigger than that. You want to start small, scale up later, or start small and rinse and repeat. You know, if you go and build one house and you make a £200,000 profit and it's took you 6 months, for you, that might just be perfect every single year. Well, if I just do one of these every year, I can work 6 months, I can earn £200,000, I can take 6 months off through the winter and go abroad, which is pretty much our business model. You know, we stay small, we rinse and repeat. We're not interested in building massive sites, getting tied up and sort of going boom or bust. So you've set your parameters, and one of the first things you're going to notice on Rightmove is, land is very expensive, and it's fair to say that it is overpriced on Rightmove. That comes down to estate agents not really knowing how to value land. So one of the first things they will do is they will say, well, it's a third for the land, it's a third for the build, and it's a third profit. Now, that probably worked maybe 20 years ago. It certainly doesn't work today, just because like materials are expensive, labor's expensive. So that formula has had to change. So we like to look at it this way. No more than 25% of gross development value, what their houses are going to sell for land, 50% for the build and all your professional fees, and then you then make a 25% profit. Now, at that 25% profit, yes, there's going to be some finance costs. So ultimately, we're looking for that 20% profit after all costs. But for the sake of land, we don't want to pay any more than about 25% of what it's going to be worth. So let's say you're going to build £1 million house. We don't want to pay any more than 250,000 for the land. We've got £500,000 for the build, all your professional fees, and therefore we make a £250,000 profit. Okay, so that's our sort of formula that we stick with. There has been some increase in costs. So we're starting to find that, now we're even needing to buy land for sort of 20, 22% of that gross development value. Now, we just bought a plot of land off Rightmove. We've actually paid 14.36% of gross development value. So on the face of it, it's a good deal. Managed to get it at a great price. That comes down to the negotiations, which we'll probably talk about in another video. But for now, we're talking about finding land on Rightmove and why other people will walk away from it. So agents overprice it. So already we've got to bring down the expectations of the agent and the vendor as well, because they're going to tell the vendor it's worth a lot more money to get them on the books. You can imagine if you've got a car worth £10,000 and someone comes around, a trader, and says, well, we'll put it on our advertisement for £12,000. You're more than likely going to go with that person because psychologically now we've got £12,000 in our head. So it can do some damage, and we have to try and bring them down to planet Earth, which is doable. Some of my mentees have bought land 50% of what you see it for sale on Rightmove. 50%. So that's hard to get your head around, but it can be done, and we'll show you how to do that in a bit. If you've ever wanted to become a developer, just like Mark, go into the description below, check out my 8-step property developer's blueprint, the full step-by-step system to becoming a property developer, even if you don't have any experience or money, and you can get started today and be like Mark, making those 6-figure profits. So because the agents overprice this land, the majority of people will talk themselves out of they're never going to accept this. So let's say a bit of land has gone on the market for 500,000. It's only worth, maybe 300, 350. Straight away, 99% of people will talk themselves out of going to look at the plot and going to put an offer, because they will say the vendor will never accept 300, 350. And what they're really doing is they're talking as if it's their land, their money, and what they would do. But you can't do that because we have to be governed by the numbers, okay? So that cuts out majority of the competition. And this really is like, one of the key things that you need to remember when you see land or even property on Rightmove. When you start seeing something and you think something's wrong with it or something's overpriced, there's going to be loads of other people saying exactly the same thing. But that's not us. We're developers, we are looking for opportunities, and we are governed by the numbers. So that means we're cutting down the competition. There's only going to be a few people that will say, well, look, let's look into this a bit more. Let's do our due diligence. Let's run the numbers. Let's go and do a viewing. And let's see actually why the vendor's selling. Because this is the key thing. When you understand why a vendor is selling, we can often create a solution to solve that problem. So, I bought a lot of property years ago up to, 45, 50% below market value. I bought land at 40% below what it's listed for as well. And that's all to do with finding out why the vendor's selling. Now, if a vendor wants to sell like really, really quick because it's a problem property, or they've just had enough of it, or they just need the money really, really quick, they will sell a discount, like a significant discount. So understanding why vendors want to sell is probably the number one skill to learn when you're going out doing viewings and looking for land or looking for property. And some vendors are clearly not interested in trying to achieve the highest amount of money. They're just not. And again, it's hard to get your head around that sometimes, because you think, well, if it's worth 100, surely they're going to want to wait and try and get £100,000. Doesn't work like that. Like I say, we bought property and land below half of what it's worth purely because the vendor is more interested in our offer than trying to achieve the highest amount of money. Now, land's a little bit different to property in the sense of, like, if you've got an empty property, it's prone to vandalism, squatters, you're paying council tax, you're paying insurance, whatever. With land, it can just sit there and it does nothing. So generally, a landowner isn't as motivated to sell land like they are property. But ultimately, they still want to sell it. They're motivated to sell it. For some reason, they've put it on the market. They're ready to sell. They've made that decision. So if the land's expensive, most people have walked away. Let's be that 5 to 10% of the people that actually make the decision to go and do a viewing. Viewings are essential. When you go and view a plot, you'll often see that the land looks bigger than what it does on the sales particulars, on the photos, for example. Sometimes the boundaries are not very clearly defined. One of my mentees, he went to buy a site for 27 houses, and what it appeared that by the time he went through the hedge and actually looked at the land, he could actually get 90 on there. And the agent didn't even know that. The agent just thought that the land that the vendor was selling was just a small part that was all hedged in, and they didn't realise there was actually another 2/3 behind it. So you've got to go and do viewings. So you want to go and do viewings because 90% chance of more of getting that offer accepted if you go and do a viewing. And then if you can go meet the vendor, you've got 90% more chance of actually getting the offer accepted even more, because the vendor is the decision maker, not the agent. So we're not trying to cut out the agent, but go at weekends, go at evenings, especially Sundays. The vendors are going to be a little bit more relaxed. They're not rushing around at work, for example. So that's going to be a really key significant thing in building rapport, understanding why the vendor's selling. You can even ask them, what's the lowest price you're willing to take? That's something that we certainly ask, because then they've at least given you a benchmark of their sort of hope offer. Not saying they'll accept that, or not saying that is the most they'll take, but normally they give you a figure in mind, so at least you can go back, look at your numbers and see if it's miles off or not too far. But meeting the vendor is going to be one of the best things you can do, because often you can try and get their details. People do business with people, so again, the sooner you can meet the vendor, definitely the better. So one of the other things that people look at when they're looking at things on Rightmove is they'll go through the particulars and they might see something like contamination or archaeology, and they'll talk themselves out of even going to look at it. Oh, well, that's a problem. That's got asbestos or Japanese knotweed, for example. And again, you've got to catch yourself not talking like everybody else, because those problems can become opportunities. If they've got, say, contaminated soil, well, whoever buys that site has got to deal with the problem. And there's going to be a cost to that problem, and we can work out what that cost is. That's not a problem. And that cost is just going to come off the asking price. Now, if a vendor's got a problem property or problem land, like I say, contamination, archaeology, that's a great negotiation tool. So sometimes we actually look for sites with these problems, knowing that less people are going to be after them, knowing that less people don't know how to solve that problem. You know, a lot of people just don't know how to deal with archaeology or what it costs to deal with contamination or the process, all the different phases of the surveys. You know, we do because we're experienced, and we can use that experience to negotiate a really, really good deal. So yeah, sometimes we'll actually look for these problems. We know how to solve the problems. We know what the costs are. We can, you know, use that cost plus some because we want to get paid for our time that we're going to do to solve that problem. And often we can get a really good bargain. And I'll give you an example. A lady had a property, didn't want to stick it on the market with the agent because it had asbestos, it was on a septic tank, and she knew it was unmortgageable because it was non-standard construction. So they contacted us through our letter drops, and what we did, we went round to meet the vendor, find out why she was wanting to sell, and she said, look, it's my dad's house, my dad's not very well, I live up in Leeds, I want to move my dad up with me as soon as possible, just in case he has a fall, and, you know, I'm really worried about him. So I said, well, okay, not a problem, we are interested. And she said, you do realise that you can't get a mortgage on the property? I said, yeah, that's fine, you explained that. It's not a problem for us, we're cash buyers. Even if you haven't got the cash, you always got to say you're a cash buyer. You'll find the money in multiple ways. And then she said, oh, you know, it's full of asbestos. I said, not a problem, you know, we can deal with that. And she goes, oh, you do realise we're not on main drains, it's on a septic tank. Yeah, not a problem, we can deal with that. So she's highlighting all the problems to us. And to us, it's like, that's fine. So that straight away, it's a bit like someone selling a car. You know, if someone's selling you a car and they say, well, you know, it failed the MOT on this or the tyres, and sometimes they will highlight some problems because that way they're not trying to get the highest price. They're trying to say, well, look, there are some problems. We don't expect to get the highest price, but we are, you know, we really want to sell. So we've done something similar like this before. So I said, look, we have bought something like this before. We demolished it, got planning, built a house. So it's not a problem. We're experiencing this kind of thing. And I just said, what's the lowest price you'll take? And she said 70. So I said, well, I'll go away, do the numbers, and I'll come back and put an offer to you. So I put the offer to the lady. I think it's like 55,000, I think it was. Sent my deal analyzer over, and she said, well, if you can give me 57 and pay my legals, we'll do a deal. And it was as quick as that. So find out why they're selling, how motivated are they. Now, she wasn't interested in the highest price. This was her dad's house. What was most important to her was, I just want to sell the house quick and get my dad up. Now, as soon as we agreed that deal, she literally went back up to Leeds and took her dad with her. Like, literally took his stuff, gone within 24 hours. Even though we hadn't got heads of terms drawn up, we hadn't gone into legals. So she obviously put her trust into us to fulfill that purchase, which we did. We went on to buy that house and demolish it and build another house. But, you know, it's not about the money. It's about solving the vendor's problem. It's about creating a win-win. It has to work by the numbers when we buy this stuff. Otherwise, there's no deal to be done. You know, and the lady's stuck with a house and she can't move her dad up, etc., etc. So yeah, have a look through Rightmove. If you see land with contamination, archaeology, asbestos, non-mortgageable, they're great opportunities. Those vendors have got problems. They're going to struggle to sell them because of those problems. And like I say, as a developer, we are a problem solver. We solve people's problems. We create win-win solutions. And there's loads of these on Rightmove. One thing you can do on Rightmove is set up alerts. So we talked about, you know, not going too far away from your house, maybe 10, 15, maybe 20 miles. You can actually set alerts up for those type of properties up to a certain value on your Rightmove. And again, as soon as those alerts come in of new listings, you can act quick and go and do a viewing. The other alerts you can get is when price reductions happen. Now, when a vendor reduces the price, that means they're more motivated. So it's probably been on the market a long while. Maybe their circumstances have changed and they'll accept a lower offer. Maybe they've sold to another developer who claims he can get the finance, which a lot of them can't because they don't know how to get the finance. Therefore, they have to pull out. That really annoys the vendor because they've probably lost, you know, 4, 6, even 9 months of going through the sales process, and they've been messed about, and psychologically they've spent the money or they need the money to maybe pay off some debts or whatever they're going to do with the money. And again, this is where if you get those alerts, you can act very, very quickly. And we've bought land and properties this way. As soon as we see an alert, we go on there, we go and do another viewing, maybe a second viewing, or it's one we've been keeping an eye on, maybe it's overpriced. And then as soon as it gets price dropped, we go and do a viewing or put an offer in. Our next site was bought just that way. As soon as it was reduced, we acted, put an offer in. I didn't even go to view it. I was actually away travelling in the Alps at the time, but I know our area. We stick close to where we live, and I managed to secure that deal from a couple of emails while I was out hiking and cycling in France. It can be done. I'm proof that it can be done. But yeah, set those alerts up and act quick as soon as stuff comes on the market or as soon as stuff gets reduced. One of the biggest challenges on Rightmove that you are going to have is that agents, they don't really know what they're doing with land, a lot of them. So a lot of land is sold through residential agents, but it is, to be fair, I'm not going to tie them all with the same brush, but they don't have a clue what they're doing when it comes to land. And what you'll often see is they'll list the land and they'll put the things wrong on it, the description. And again, I'll give you an example. So we looked at a plot of land. It was direct to vendor at the time. We didn't want to buy it. The vendor eventually went through the process of getting the planning, stuck it on the market with an agent, and it was for 3 houses or 3 bungalows, sold by the agent, planning permission, blah, blah, blah. So checked it out. One of my mentees was looking to buy it, and what it appeared was the planning permission was for self-builds, and the agent didn't know this, and the vendor didn't really understand it. But what it appeared was the agent just listed it as planning, so therefore you think, great, I'll buy that site, it works. But you can't go and build 3 self-build houses as a developer. It just doesn't work like that for the planning restrictions. Now, the architect had just gone down sort of the fairly easiest route to get the planning just to satisfy the vendor. But that put a problem for the vendor because they can't sell it because no one's going to buy it because there's a road on there. So, who's going to go and buy one of them plots when it's got to put a road in it? Who's putting the road in? Who's putting the utilities in? Who's paying that? Who's going to be responsible, once it's all built? So the planning is never going to work. So you can go back and change that planning if you know what you're doing. But this is a prime example of the agent lists a property, thinks they know what they're doing, and it's just never going to sell. Now, once you know what you're doing and you get educated, you can go back to the vendor, solve the problem, get yourself, a good deal. Vendor gets to sell the land, which is what they're after. Agent gets to do a sale. Like I say, we're not trying to cut the agent out here, and we can create a win-win, but it's got to work on a certain way. Now, what I will say is, you've got to do your due diligence when you see these plots go on the market with agents, because like I say, a lot of them list them wrong. They get the boundaries wrong, they get the planning wrong, and a lot of people can walk away based on that wrong information. So find all those bits of land, do your due diligence, check on the planning portal, do your own checks, and eventually you will find a couple of bargains where the agent's got it wrong, the vendor can't sell, and you can come in and solve that problem. I mean, Rightmove is just one of many ways. We have 30 plus ways to find land. Rightmove is probably one of the easiest ways to get started, very easy to search, very easy to browse through stuff, organise viewings, and get started in your property development journey. So I hope you found this video useful. If you've got any questions about Rightmove or anything you want us to produce in the future, whether that's funding, maybe doing joint ventures, build costs, put it in the comments and I'll happily create some videos for you to get you started on your property development sooner.